Hello everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to unpack a massive historical mystery. Have you ever wondered how looking at just one, seemingly forgotten old document can completely expose the hidden mechanics of a global financial collapse? Well, that is exactly what we're going to do right now. We are heading back to the Roaring '20s, long before the infamous 1929 stock market crash, to look at a moment when the world's financial architecture was quietly but desperately creaking under pressure. We're going to dig into the primary sources, pulled straight from government archives, to figure out how the global debt machine actually operated behind the scenes. So let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Picture this. The year is 1926. Georges Clemenceau, the legendary former Prime Minister of France, is 85 years old. He's been completely out of the political spotlight, holding a strict, self-imposed silence for 6 long years. But then, completely out of the blue, he breaks that silence to publicly challenge the sitting U.S. President, Calvin Coolidge, on the incredibly touchy subject of international debt. Now you have to ask yourself, why on earth would an 85-year-old retired statesman feel the need to step back into the geopolitical boxing ring? Like, what was he seeing that the rest of the world was just totally ignoring?
To figure that out, we have to put on our historical detective hats for a second. There's a funny little discrepancy here. If you look at American records from the U.S. Naval Institute or reports from the U.S. financial press like the Commercial and Financial Chronicle, they all explicitly state this letter was sent on August 8, 1926. But when we actually cross-verify with French archives and Clemenceau's own manuscript that was published a few years later, it turns out his original draft was dated August 9th. It's a tiny detail, right? But it actually shows us exactly how this event rippled across the Atlantic in real time. Because whether it was the 8th or the 9th, the message he sent absolutely sent shockwaves through the financial world the second it landed. To understand why his letter was so urgent, we have to talk about the sheer scale of the money involved here. Over $10 billion. That was the American perspective at the time. And listen, for the 1920s, that is just a staggering, mind-bending figure. That's the kind of money that builds entire nations from scratch, or in this case, tears them down. During World War I, the United States had loaned over $10 billion to the Allied powers, and from Washington's point of view, which was formalized by Congress in 1922, this was strictly business. It was a commercial transaction. Money was borrowed, so money needed to be repaid. The U.S. expected its cash back, plain and simple, and they went ahead and negotiated repayment terms with 17 different countries based on that exact, straightforward financial logic.
Let's move to and see how this builds. Because that massive American expectation, that was really only half the story. While America is sitting there waiting for his $10 billion, Europe was suffocating under a totally different scale of financial burden, 132 billion gold marks. To put that into perspective, that's roughly 31.5 billion US dollars at the time. This was the crushing penalty placed squarely on Germany by the Allied Reparations Commission back in 1921. So think about this setup. You have the Allies owing the US a massive fortune, and Germany owing the Allies an even more astronomically massive fortune. You can really start to see the pressure cooker being built here.
Which brings us right back to Clemenceau and his intense frustration. He was incredibly blunt. He told the Americans, "We are debtors and you are creditors." See, he wasn't trying to dodge the bill. He wasn't denying the debt existed. But he passionately argued that you literally cannot evaluate this situation as a simple money piece, or treat it like a problem at the cash register. He practically pleaded with the United States to consider the blood and treasure, the devastating human and material sacrifices that France had endured during the war. From the French perspective, treating this like a standard Tuesday morning bank loan completely ignored the reality of a totally devastated European continent.
So the crucial point is that we have two fundamentally incompatible economic logics trying to run the entire global system at the exact same time. The French logic was highly dependent. They argued they absolutely fundamentally required the reparations payments from Germany just to afford their debt payments to the U.S. Meanwhile, the U.S. logic, which was cemented by things like the Mellon-Behringer Agreement that calculated France's debt at a $1.68 billion present value, was strictly separated. The U.S. government officially and repeatedly refused to link German reparations to Allied war debts. To America, they were two completely distinct ledger entries. To France, it was literal national survival.
And you know, when you have two massive financial logics that violently clash in the real world, something has to break. And it did, right in 1923. Germany simply defaulted. They literally could not pay those massive reparations. In response, France and Belgium militarily occupied the Ruhr, which was Germany's industrial heartland, to basically extract the payment by force. The German government supported passive resistance among the workers, and this decision completely shattered their economy. It turned regular inflation into catastrophic, explosive hyperinflation. We're talking about money becoming virtually worthless overnight. The entire European economic system essentially broke down.
So, what do you do when the system breaks down? Well, this catastrophe led to an American fix. Enter the 1924 Dawes Plan. This was a US-backed financial rescue package that lowered Germany's immediate reparation burden to something actually manageable, reorganized their currency to bring some stability, and most importantly, injected a $200 million foreign bank loan into Germany. But what's absolutely vital to grasp here is that this loan was driven by the US private financial market, spearheaded by JP Morgan. Suddenly, out of nowhere, US private capital became the critical, load-bearing linchpin holding up the entire roof of European stability.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact hidden mechanism that Clemenceau was trying to call attention to. We've just pulled back the curtain on a massive international debt loop. Think about it as 4 steps. Step 1. US private capital flows into Germany. Step 2. Germany uses that capital and their newly stabilized economy to pay reparations. Step 3. France and the UK receive those reparation funds. Step 4. France and the UK take those exact same funds and use them to pay back their war debts to the United States government. It was literally the macroeconomic equivalent of paying off a credit card with another credit card. The money was just traveling in a massive, fragile circle, deeply entangling economies that claimed to be completely independent. When you dive into the U.S. State Department's historical data, the trajectory of these Dawes Plan payments is frankly alarming. Back in 1924, it's about 893 million Reichsmarks. But when you track the numbers, into 1926 and 1927, which, by the way, is the exact time Clemenceau writes his frantic letter, the payment requirement spikes to 1.38 billion Reichsmarks, and it just continues to aggressively escalate every single year after that. This data proves that the crushing financial pressure was building up incredibly fast inside that debt loop we just talked about. Clemenceau saw this pressure gauge hitting the red zone, and he knew for a fact it was completely unsustainable.
Let's zoom out for a second. Why does all of this matter to us today? Well, because it perfectly teaches us how unseen dependencies create massive systemic risk. By 1928, U.S. bank loans had become the primary, singular pillar keeping the German economy, and by extension, the entire global debt cycle, afloat. The world's financial structure wasn't built on solid ground at all. It was a precarious house of cards, reliant entirely on continuous, uninterrupted U.S. private investment flowing across the Atlantic. If that American pipeline ever stopped flowing, the entire cycle would instantly freeze.
Which leads us to our final, provocative thought for this explainer. We are so often taught in school that the 1929 Great Depression was simply a sudden stock market crash in New York. Just a really bad week on Wall Street. But after tracing the 1926 warnings of Georges Clemenceau, looking at the actual data, and seeing that massive, circular flow of capital, we really have to ask, was it just a market crash, or was it the inevitable, catastrophic collapse of this incredibly fragile, deeply interconnected global debt loop? When American funding finally dried up in 1929, the loop snapped, taking the entire global economy down with it. It just goes to show how one 85-year-old's letter in 1926 can hold the ultimate key to understanding a global catastrophe. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the numbers.